central library here is now the biggest in the whole of Europe. I can't tell you how proud I am of that.
The 7th floor secret garden, the whole, basically 360 of the whole of Birmingham City Centre. You can't beat that. You get a view of everything.
Me personally like the entrance. I think the entrance is the best bit. That's me personally anyways.
The ring feel to it, you know, like you've got the bull rings, you've got the circle of life, the circle of knowledge, you know.
I wouldn't associate it with being a library, no way. Maybe art and design gallery or something.
Yeah, it looks like a gallery.
It doesn't look like a library, 100% no.
I was deeply impressed when I saw the design in the newspapers initially, and I thought, that's brave. Now, it really is brave, and to see it realised is just absolutely wonderful.
I like it because you can smell the plants and there's lots of nice books around.
Downstairs was fabulous, you know, just the idea of just having, you know, places where kids can sort of lie, because that's how they read, you know. I've never seen a kid sat at a table reading a book, as is prescribed generally.
When I'm older, when I become a dentist, I'm going to be coming here because it's next to my house, and I'm going to be studying in the library, and it's going to be really fun because I'm going to feel like I'm at home.
I never quite get tired of watching that video. Thanks very much for inviting me to be with you today. It's a real pleasure to be here. I started writing down while Pilar was speaking some of the sort of points of contact between what she was saying and what the analysis, the journey that I'll take you on, and I gave up when the page got full. So, but the top three, I think, are ones that are worth just mentioning at this stage. One was the absolute need to focus on the customer and to place customer centricity or focus at the heart of your change journey. My second one was the use of the word discovery, and Pilar had a really good slide about that. And we've tried to switch the focus quite considerably from resource recovery to resource discovery, and this element of surprise and serendipity and browsing, chance encounters, exploration, the journey that we wanted to give people in our library. And the third was a much more pragmatic one, which I think you described as see it, own it, fix it. Is that right? We actually stole quite shamelessly from our builder, the construction company they call themselves, the mantra "Don't walk by," and that's one that we borrowed and put into the manual of staff behaviour, if you like, and I think it's really analogous to that. Nobody can ignore something that's going wrong. You need to own it and get it fixed. So what I'll do over the next half an hour or so is just take you through the journey that we went through, and touch on some of the aspects of that may or may not have been innovation. And of course, sometimes innovation is when people like Apple do something that is completely new, and sometimes it's innovation when it's just new to you, and new to the environment that you're working in. Context is everything. So let me start with some context about Birmingham, just to put the whole situation of community at the heart of this. So Birmingham is city of around about 1 million people. It's the second city of the UK. City in the middle of the country with no real natural resources. There are no rivers. There's no coastline, of course. There's no natural resources under the ground. It's there because of the ingenuity of its people, their creativity, their innovation, and it remains a fact to this day, slightly to my surprise, that 65% of all the patents that are lodged in the whole of the UK are lodged from people living within a 35-mile radius of Birmingham. So that notion of the birthplace of ideas, and that's what we want the library to be, is still very much alive. But it was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, where James Watt and Matthew Boulton took forward the whole steam-powered ideas that drove the revolution around the world. And the idea that Birmingham then became a city of 1,000 trades. If you wanted to buy something, get something made, you got it made in Birmingham. It's as a second city, it's got two defining characteristics which certainly guided us on our journey of change through from our old library to the new library and the new service model that we developed there. The first is diversity. So it's now something like 41% non-white. And within probably 5 years now, it will become the UK's first major non-white majority city. It's also the youngest city in Europe. So the percentage of people under the age of 25 is higher in Birmingham than it is in any other major city in Europe. And that did guide us very much through the way we've formed and shaped our services. A pervading and very powerful belief that if we're not delivering a service that's appropriate for the needs of children and young people, it doesn't matter what else we're doing, we're failing. A major city that has some challenges, because along with youthfulness and diversity come a number of opportunities, but also quite significant challenges, those of quite high levels of unemployment, driven largely by skills and qualification deficits. So there are jobs, but the people who are there are not getting those jobs because they're not skilled sufficiently, and they don't have the appropriate qualifications. It's a city that has quite high levels of functional illiteracy in the English language, partly but not exclusively due to the high percentage of migrant population, but the level of adult functional illiteracy is calculated to be about 20%, so it's 1 in 5 people. It's frighteningly high. It has poor health outcomes. Graduates don't stay in the city, although we have 5 universities, our levels of retentions are not good enough. And the image of Birmingham, both domestically and to an extent internationally, although less so, I think, has not been particularly positive. And so we started from that analysis that we were wanting to deliver a library, the Library of Birmingham, that could satisfy and meet those needs and deliver social capital, deliver community outcomes, deliver community engagement, and deliver the social, economic and health outcomes that we were looking for. And that the words that we attached to that vision were creativity, innovation, inspiration. We wanted to inspire people with the library, including members of the minor royal family that we have over there. But you won't know about that. You won't care either. And to ground all of this in a much clearer strategy for working in partnership with other institutions in the city, a clearer digital strategy, being much more business-like. I think we'd always been a good library. We're probably not a very well-run business. A completely transformed service offer, which more in a moment, and managing all those relationships much more successfully. So what I'll talk through is a little bit of the process of change and illustrate those processes as I go along. The tactics that we deployed changed almost by the day. The strategy we revisited quite regularly. When you come back around to the vision and the ambition, those didn't change, and I think it's important to hold firm and be consistent. But following that cycle round is what I'll do now, going around clockwise. So the ambition was always to be the best, and I see no harm in that. And if other people have identical ambitions to create the best public library in the world, then absolutely good luck to them, because we should all be endeavouring to be the best. We adopted this strapline that you can see on the top of the slide there, rewriting the book. And we did that quite early on, and what the message that was conveyed consistently throughout the project was that everything was up for grabs, that this was a clean sheet of paper, that we were going to do everything differently. The idea of a library like no other, I'm not sure whether it is or not, but it certainly had an impact. But that nobody should regard anything as sacred. There were no sacred cows. And is that visible? We took a phrase from Daniel Burnham, as it says there, the author of the Plan of Chicago, make no little plans, that we wanted to be ambitious. And I think whether you're dealing with, as the girl in the video clip said, the largest public library in Western Europe, or whether you're dealing with a small local community library, you should be ambitious. You shouldn't have little plans. Let's make them big, aim high. And the vision, to turn to that now, we were well aware that we were identifying, creating a new brand for the city. A slide a few moments ago showed an image of the Bullring Shopping Centre, Selfridges building, which has been the image on all the city's marketing literature for the past decade, I would say. And what we very deliberately set out to do was to say that and this was even before we knew what the library would look like as a design, but the library should actually redefine the whole city for the foreseeable future, for the next decade, if you like, and that marketing Birmingham would be marketing the library. It was going to be part of the mix of attractions in the city, but particularly to attract and enable the city to move forward with reinventing itself from being a manufacturing city to moving to becoming much more a focus for digital media, for the knowledge industries, for the creative sectors. And I can't remember if any of the people who were interviewed in that video clip used the word pride, but that word has come over numerous times. Birmingham people, and I'm not one by origin, I actually come from Liverpool originally, but Birmingham people have a very self-deprecating form of humour. They run themselves down, they run the city down, and actually we wanted to counter that and say, well, that's all very well if you're being funny, but you need to be proud of your city, and the library should make you proud. And we also wanted to convey the notion that this part of the brand, if you like, the image, that there was a reason to be here. This isn't just about shopping, and it's not just about living or being alive. It's about the values of living big city culture. And I think one of the most significant things that we were able to do in terms of our public relations campaign was to secure Malala Yousafzai to open the library back in September 2013, because she, apart from being an incredible young woman and a wonderful speaker, and she gave us all the right messages, but she really captured everything that we wanted to say about Birmingham as a young city, as a diverse city, as a hospitable city. We talked through with our staff, and at some considerable length, the ambition, in a sense, was non-negotiable. The vision was very much trying to secure buy-in from staff, and the sort of long sort of stream of consciousness that you can see on the screen here was really the product of thinking aloud with staff in a series of large and small group sessions, which we had externally facilitated, because that was, I think, helpful to us and useful to do that. I'll come back to that in a moment. So this was very much a sort of brain dump almost, rather than trying to arrive at a single vision for what a library should be. I totally agree with whoever it was who said, I think it was Annie, wasn't it, that a library should retain, you said that, didn't you? A library is a library. We had a long and anguished debate about whether a library should be called something else. I've lost count of the number of people to whom I've given tours of our library who've said, it's not really a library, is it? And the counter is always, yes, it is. It's a library for the 21st century. It's a new sort of library. Get used to it. And And I think I think the brand library is so powerful, and there are successful examples in the UK. I'm not so well aware elsewhere, but in the UK where one or two library authorities have successfully rebranded their libraries. One London borough, for example, has adopted the term Ideas Store, which is probably well known to you. There are discovery centres in another part of the country, and I think it's worked once or twice. But I strongly recommend and support the notion that a library is a library. What you put behind that definition, and all of these things lie behind it, is probably much more important. So we talked through with staff, and I'm really going to dwell on the process rather than the outcome this morning. And these are their thoughts, sort of arrived at by a process of negotiation and discussion. We limited the amount of words and phrases, and that process in itself, because we started off through these workshops with a huge list of what's a library in the 21st century, and we said, no, if it doesn't fit on one slide, and the font size has to be legible from the back of the lecture theatre. If it doesn't fit on there, then it doesn't go in. So if you can't agree, go away and talk it through until you do come to an agreement. So these were the dimensions that we thought about, and you can see, I think, a number of the ideas that have already come through from what Pilar was saying, reflected in that as well. Particularly the ideas of community engagement, community space, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But that idea that we're trying, in a managed way, I think it's fair to say, to effect a transition from a perception of the library as being an institutional space to one where it's perceived as being owned by the community, where within a number of established norms of behaviour, and those always need to be negotiated and agreed, but it's actually not just as a community space because that's a nice, handy and trendy thing to call it, but it actually does mean something. It belongs to you in the sense that you can help program it, you can help direct it. And on the bottom set of descriptions there, I think importantly, we identified it as an event space and said this will be a visitor attraction, and you'll see when I put up some figures in a moment how powerful that dimension to the library has been. But that was because we always said, you know, we're not just building a library here, we're building part of the city. We're rebuilding the city's image, we're rebuilding the city, and part of that has to be for the visitor to the city. Three key dimensions to the journey of change that we went through, and I'll go into this in more detail in a moment, but these were the three dimensions that teased out and tried to negotiate and discuss these with staff what they actually meant. So essentially from a transactional service where for many years, and quite successfully, we've placed books and information at the product, if you like, at the heart of what we offer. And in the old library, the old central library, calculated that approximately 75% of the human resource at the disposal of the organisation went into servicing the transactions involving book lending and the satisfaction of information-based inquiries. The volume of those inquiries was going down almost by the day, and you'll see when I put up some statistics. In the new library, the number of visitors who come to borrow a book is now it's less than 1 in 5. It's 15%. So we were forecasting a significant fall away in that transactional business. It actually, in numerical terms, it stayed the same, but because the number of people who are visiting has gone up so much, as a part of our business, it's just not that significant anymore. So why are we putting 75% of our resource into it? Information-based inquiries, it's a truth that you may recognise, you may acknowledge, you may choose not to, and you may draw different inferences from it than I do. But the reality is that most people in this room, most people in society now carry information tools in their pockets, in their wallets, in their handbags. In the 5 years ago, we employed 40 information librarians. We now employ 8, and I don't think they are actually over busy. We have redirected those resources to other functions within the library, to that transformation agenda, to people who are working with the community, to securing economic outcomes, to getting people better placed to set up their own business, to get themselves a job, to improve their social lifestyle. We've shifted the resource base. That journey has gone dramatically from transactions to transformation. The second is to move from delivery to engagement, and that very much reflecting the point I made a moment or two ago, that this is not about you coming into the library and experiencing what the library has to offer. This is about you coming into the library and experiencing what you and your community colleagues, other organisations, other individuals have got to offer. This is a wider issue, and how we've engaged with the community right through the project. I'll show you in a moment. We set tried to set the standard and the message to everybody on the project very early on. But that role for community co-production of services, co-production of events is absolutely critical. So don't treat this as our library, it's your library, is the message. And the third dimension of change is from information to learning. I'll illustrate what I mean by that, and I think the next slide helps. I see this sort of pyramid of sort of journey that you take with data at the bottom, and the information layer where I think libraries have pointed themselves at very successfully for 150 years now. But I see that as being substantially eroded and increasingly eroded by the power of mobile data and mobile information sources. And yes, I acknowledge all the issues there are with achieving a manageable amount of information, with achieving a relevant amount of information, with achieving reliable information from searches. But the reality is increasingly people will do that for themselves. So where we've tried to focus our library is on learning. So I see information as essentially a product. Learning is a process, and knowledge and wisdom, if you like. I'm not quite sure how I feel about the word wisdom, but the pyramid would have had a flat top if I didn't put wisdom there. Those are outcomes. Nobody can give you knowledge. Knowledge is what you know. It comes from inside, but it comes from that process of learning. So where we've tried to focus our attention is on inspiring people to want to learn, giving them the tools how to learn. And some of those, of course, are about effective information management, because we all know we drown in information. But understanding how those information tools work is a key part of that learning experience. Understanding that personalised information as given to you by Amazon and thousands of other websites is actually a curtailment of freedom of information. It's limiting your freedom of choice. It's assuming that somebody else knows what you want. And unless you understand that, then you're being tyrannized by the people who own that information and increasingly own your information. So that learning process applied to information, I think, is absolutely critical to getting a better understanding of the world, learning from your peers, learning from each other, learning from professionals, from experts, learning from resources, but doing so in a judicious way, in an understanding way. So those are the three dimensions of change that we were looking to effect. So the what did we change and how, and I'll talk through some of this. I'll not go around the whole circle there, but we changed things at a huge level of detail, the operating model, how we do things, the services that we offer. Very big way for individuals, staff roles, complete redefinition of staff roles, how we managed events, the customer experience. And at the very biggest level, what we were trying to change was the city itself. The city should not be the same after this library has opened, and we wanted to change perceptions of a library. Because my own professional and passionate belief is in the future of the public library. I also think, and I think there might be a slide later on that says this, that if we don't change, then the public library is in real danger of dying, that it will only survive if we continue to change. And I completely agree with the Whitewater Rapids analogy to change, that it's there to stay now. Should be legible from the back. The two slides to talk about how we made the change happen, and again, starting from the top and working around in a clockwise direction. That there needs to be a recognition that change has to happen, and we reflected on that quite a lot with staff, and I think to this day, some few do not see that and do not agree, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But the two dimensions, either you acknowledge that the world in which libraries have lived in, with declining book issues, declining inquiry numbers, is one that is on a slope that we have to get off because we have to reinvent, or you don't. The other dimension of change that we said is that I predicted that we would get in the new library double the number of visitors, and we would have exactly the same resources. It's been broadly proven to be a correct forecast. You cannot serve twice the number of visitors with the same number of people if you do things in the same way. There has to be a hunger for change. There's got to be real leadership and a passion to do things differently and to challenge the status quo. But I completely agree as well with the notion of cultural change as being at the heart of this, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. And being clear about what has to change, analysing it, not just, as I've done so far, dwelling in broad generalities. I forgot what you call them now, Pilar, but we called ours change champions, and they sound exactly like the gentleman you had on the screen a minute ago. We tried to empower people. Some people didn't necessarily want to be empowered, but that's another issue. But there has to be a willingness on the part of leadership, on the part of management, to convey a sense of ownership, responsibility, empowerment to people lower down the organisation, leading from wherever. And along with that goes authorising, I've called it failure, but that's a slightly pejorative term. If you do new things, you are taking risks, and some of them won't work, and you have to accept that. I'll show you some examples of our failures later on, but they form part of the learning process. And in terms of making change happen in some more detail, what we tried to do, identify our priorities. We stopped doing some things because there was an immediate, well, we've got to do all of this. How are we going to cope? We can't do that and everything we have been doing. Correct. So stop doing some of what you have been doing. And the process of identifying what we were going to stop came from below because we pushed it down there. Management is not going to tell you what to stop doing. You need more time, you find the time. Tell us and we'll agree it. So creating that scope and clarity of what we wanted to do, and then because the vision is a large one, chunking it up. So creating work packages, breaking things down into manageable lumps with milestones. The change champions were crucial in driving this forward. So again, it wasn't top-down led, it was led from within the organisation. We had to resource it. This was part of a major programme. Now, you either do that through funding to bring in external, the fresh eyes approach, or you do it from within. And either can be made to work, depending on the resource base and the degree of change that you're looking at. But for goodness sake, you need some quick wins as well, because otherwise people are going to lose confidence and faith that the direction of travel is the right one. So we asked the question, what did we want to transform? And those again were some of the answers, and they're a little bit of a slightly different restatement of some of the things I've already put on earlier slides. The the customer service was at the heart of this. It needs to be a very different customer experience. And capturing the idea that the public library, as it's captioned under the image there, the public library is public realm. So we conducted a number of workshops, as I said, with a lot of staff, and everybody at some point engaged in one way or another with these. And again, I'll talk about the levels of engagement in a moment. But that idea of customer centricity being at the heart of what we were trying to do, I think the word silos has already been used this morning. We certainly had those. We did not, even in one library, but it's a big one to be fair, we didn't have a one organisation. There was a sort of default, almost a bureaucratic response that it was divided space. So the organisation and the way in which customers accessed it depended on who they encountered, what they actually wanted, and that was really not a satisfactory situation. We needed to move to a cohesive, a one library. Again, the phrase has already been used. A single brand identity, a consistent standard of customer experience. And we then worked through with staff, as I say, and this was done about 4 years out from opening as part of the early design process. There's 2 slides with all this lot on, so I'm not going to go through it all now, but I'm sure you'll get copies if you want them, and you may or may not. But this was the product of saying, where are we now? Let's be honest. What does it look like in terms of dimensions that we identified, the customer relationship, or in terms of our social networking skills? How empowered do staff actually feel? What's the situation? How do staff actually work? And the columns in red obviously reflected what people felt was the situation in 2009. And if occasionally some of that hurts, of course, because that's part of an organisation that I've been responsible for leading for a good number of years, and none of that is particularly positive. But let's be honest about this and move forward as a whole organisation. Where do we want to get to? So that process of engaging with all the staff in the organisation was not easy, because some of the messages for management were quite painful. It's all right, we get our own back later on. But moving from red to green, moving from 2009 to 2013, how do we want to be seen, and what is it we've got to do to get there? And the first was to give really strong messages about the whole aspect of community engagement. We'd already delivered a number of impressive, but possibly slightly below the radar, community-led projects within the Library and Archive Service. What we wanted to do was to make sure that community engagement was at the absolute heart of the whole of the building project. So we ensured, working with the construction partner, that there was a lot of engagement with children. So there were regular site tours. I think several thousand people actually got to go onto a building site, probably for the first times in their lives. And that took a lot of resource and a lot of organisation, but it was absolutely worth doing. We appointed community ambassadors, and I don't know if this is something that happens frequently here, but I would absolutely endorse it as a very powerful means to spread the word. So there were about 26 of the community ambassadors, and it was essentially driven by the principle that it's my job to say what a great thing the library is. So why would you necessarily believe me? These people are independent, they're part of a community, they reach people who I could never reach in 100 years. They can get out there and spread the word. We've used them, and they're on their own terms, absolutely. Some much more than others in the course of the past 5 years, since most of them were appointed. The vast majority of those 26 are still with us as community ambassadors. I'll talk about the guy on the bottom left in a moment. The 2 guys on the bottom right, they're a good example. Stephen is very severely disabled, and he and his carer have a charitable organisation which does junk modelling, and they now occupy a space in the library which they come and take possession of. And they do that on about a monthly basis, and it's fabulously engaging. You've never seen such a mess, well, you probably have, but it's an incredible mess, and wonderfully creative and functional. And this guy masterminding, who has almost no communication skills that are one-to-one recognizable. He can only really communicate with his carer, but they have a fantastic time, as do the children who use it. And the others variously there are there's a couple of people work in the media, the two lads up the top there. Cheryl on the top left is a community singer. So they have various skills, attributes, and ways in which we've engaged with them. I would certainly recommend that if you don't do it, and it's a scheme that we're intending to extend. And Ian here really, and Jeanette will have to forgive me, I think she's heard this story a couple of times now, but he's my favourite person for the library. He was homeless when I first met him about 10 years ago, and he was a library user essentially for the warmth and the newspapers that the library could offer him. And as part of the contract with our construction company, we insisted that they employed a number of people, apprentices from the local community, local unemployed people, and homeless people. And Ian was successful in getting a job on the project. He did really well. He was promoted to be a supervisor. He's now moved on. He has a skill. He has another job. He has a home. And to cap it all, he's a published poet as well. So we rather like Ian as a model of what the library should be. I should leave while the going's good. Some of the change and innovation around technology, again, there's always an issue about adopting innovative technology because it doesn't work. So you tend to fall back on the things that are a little more tried and tested when you want them to be functional systems. But we did embed self-service, as you would expect. We use a lot of screens for doing the work that literature would have done a little while ago. And we use, you may be familiar with this, a system called Vocera for completely hands-free staff communication, which works very well for us. Some of the technology things that we experimented on, and these are now talking about content and the digital rather than infrastructural IT. As I said, not all of these worked. But they didn't half teach us some lessons. To read from the top, we built the library as a virtual library in Second Life. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. Is that known technology to you? When we did that 5 years ago, it looked like it was going to be the next big thing. And we spent a lot of time and effort on building the library there. We actually did use the library that we built there extensively for staff training, which was quite useful because they were able to walk around the library virtually long before it opened, and point out some of the operational issues. But as a tool for public engagement, it flopped completely because Second Life as a technology has gone nowhere. We started, and this worked for a while, a game called Photo Fortunes, which you could find on Facebook for a little while. It's not there now, and of course we had to spell it with 2 F's. I'm sorry. Information Overlord was a game for mobile that we developed, a resource management game, and we put a certain amount of money into a prototype. We were never able to find a business partner who would take that to full delivery. But the people so in terms of outcomes, tangible outcomes for the game, almost zero. The learning experience for the people who worked on it from the library staff, huge benefit. What's on that slide? Oh yes. We wanted to be innovative in our use of collections, and one of the challenges that the next 2 or 3 slides reflect is we have in our library some of the finest collections of photography, printed books, archives in any public library, certainly in Europe, and nobody knows about them. So at quite an early stage in the process, I challenged both staff but also a range of digital media companies in the city. I want 3 things out of this. I want to get more people knowing about these collections. I want to get more products, different products that will engage particularly young people with material that may not be intuitively accessible to them, and certainly not through the medium of a formal exhibition. And I would quite like products that generate some income for the library, please. And those were the challenges for innovation. It's fair to say that more people have now seen Shakespeare's First Folio in the 18 months that the library's been open than did in the 35 years that it was sat in the previous central library. So I'm quite pleased with that. That's the original drawing of James Watt's steam kettle, which will be known to you all. Photographic collections. This was quite an interesting one because as part of the move from the old library, and this is one of those embarrassing librarian stories, staff in the music library discovered a box that had not been opened for 35 years since we moved in to the previous library. When opened, it turned out to contain about 500 scores from the silent movie music era. So the scores from which a cinema director would choose when he had a silent movie to put on for his pianist, his orchestra to play. The total known worldwide collection of silent movie scores is about 250. So we had twice that many in a box for 35 years. What we did with it, two things that we quite enjoyed, just as pushing these out. We worked with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra to record and play these at a number of concerts. And we launched an animation project, which was almost reverse engineering. So we challenged animators to produce an animated film to the music rather than putting the music to the film, if you see what I mean. And that, again, if I'd had time, I could have shown you a couple of the clips from that. Wonderful ticket collections. There's great stories attached to that, but I'll have to, in the interest of time, move on. And that's a drawing of famous Birmingham printer John Baskerville, who was exhumed a number of times after his death for reasons that are far too complicated to go into. But it led to one of the outcomes. Again, this was around the innovation and the challenge that we gave to the digital media companies, come up with new products. The five, you can't see them separated very clearly, but the five companies that are represented here all received investment, financial investment from ourselves and from a government agency to develop new projects as a result of a bidding process. The top left-hand exhumed was driven by the exhumation of John Baskerville on a number of occasions. And they've now they initially created a theatrical performance based on that idea, featuring both live and dead speakers. Don't ask me. That proved to be fascinating and a great experience, ridiculously expensive to stage. But it is now about to become a television program from which we will get financial rights result. And the bottom right-hand where corals is much more boring, but actually much more lucrative. It's where we've put money into developing systems, algorithms for producing better metadata. I can't say that. But all those five companies benefited from our investment, and they will, in the financial year that we're about to go into, they will start to pay us back on that return. So having that confidence to allow them to innovate and giving them the capital that they needed to innovate is paying us back. Talk a little bit about staff roles, and I think the journey that we were trying to take people on was from that role as gatekeeper to facilitator. So you should not be getting in the way. You need to facilitate people's learning process. And the idea that everybody's up for change when it's an idea, but when it gets close to hand, then it becomes a rather different matter. And the passion that people have in the service, I don't dispute it at all. It's got to be the passion for the right thing, though. And again, we work through with groups of staff. So this is the vision, this is the ambition, this is where we're trying to go, the journey we're trying to take you on. What does that mean for staff roles? And if we look, for example, at the, Jeanette mentioned in her introduction, the Business and Learning Centre that we have, in particular what they are doing now is working to intervene in people's lives to produce better outcomes for them, to set them up in business, to get them jobs. We learnt a long time ago that the business support service only works if you have a skills support service to go with it. People who come wanting to set up a business are not necessarily financially literate, IT literate, business literate, or even literate at all. Helping them to become so delivers those results. And interestingly, though we never framed it in quite such a strategic way, the local economic partnership that we have in the city now is looking at dimensions to business support, of which entrepreneurship, which is where we started, is only one. The other two are work readiness and employability. So entrepreneurship as having been the be-all and end-all, how do we start new businesses, how do we get creativity, innovation into the business startup process? It's a recognition that getting people ready for work, getting them into employment is actually just as important. I mentioned earlier on this vexed question of whether change works for everybody, and the 20-60-20 rule seems to sort of work here. It certainly did in our experience. And this is where the change champions, coming from that group of the 20% who are on board with change, that they came from that cohort. The big block of people in the middle who waiting to see, so what's it going to be like really? Can I buy into this, or should I stay on the other side of the fence? And we worked a lot on them to try and work with them to get them to understand what we were trying to achieve, the direction of travel for the organisation. And that 20% of people at the bottom who were clearly opposed to the change programme that we'd got, we left them alone. And most of them are now exiting the organisation gradually, slowly, not as quickly as I would have wanted, but they are finding it really is going to be like this, and it's not for me. And that's fine. It's not necessarily a totally negative position. It's simply making a statement of that this is not for me. Well, fine. Let's go and find something else that is right for you. I'll rattle through the last few slides. So as part of that, we defined a new service offer, completed a completely new staffing reorganisation, different staff roles for everybody, entirely new job descriptions, over 750 new policies, procedures and processes, and if that sounds excessively laborious, that was actually the reduced set, and a future operating model. This is how it's going to work. Smaller issues around staff dress code and staff identification so that people in the library wear, as you can see on the bottom right there, identifiable staff clothing. That wasn't half a battle as well. Some of you may have fought that or be thinking about fighting it. Well worth doing. Flexible and agile working so that, and you've got to do what you preach. So for the first time in 25 years, I had no office, I had an open plan workspace. Absolutely brilliant, loved it. I'm glad I'm not there anymore, but not for that reason. And a much more agile and flexible working, so people working across the whole organisation, not working just for one part of the service, but working for all of it. And we redefined the service offers, so in each one of the 6 major areas in which we deliver services, we rewrote and communicate to the public, it's on the website, this is what you can expect. Events, most of these were community-led activities, people who came to us and said, you know, I would really like to do a theatrical performance in the library, or I'd like to perform music, or in the rather sad case of Morris dancing, but we let them do it. And this is Cossack opera being performed by a black man in our amphitheatre, our outside amphitheatre. So creating that environment that's event-rich, that gives you surprising encounters, an opportunity to learn from new experiences. using the library as a cultural centre, an arts trail is reflected here. There's a self-photography project on the bottom right, arts installations that were threaded throughout the library. So people making use of the library in a moderated way to present their own skills and work. And again, showing by example to staff really that it really is going to be very different. So activities happening in the library's book rotunda space. The top right, 200 children singing throughout a whole day. I must admit, even I got a bit wearied of that, but that was for children in need. And the idea that we can do corporate dinners in the library, that it is part of the culture of the library. Whether we've achieved success or not is not really for me to say, but I was absolutely thrilled, and coincidentally it came along at almost the same time as the announcement of some fairly severe budget cuts, which I'm glad I'm not around to be implementing. But last year the Library of Birmingham got into the top 10 UK visitor destinations, and the other 9 are in London, and that, for a library outside London to do that, was a result. Great results in terms of well over 90% satisfaction in terms of its overall rating. Would you revisit it? Would you be an advocate for the library? Customer survey. We asked why did you come here today? And we did this in October that's just gone, so well over a year after we'd opened. And I'm just going to pick out a couple of statistics for this. That 15%, the fourth one down there, for borrowing an item. I knew it would be low. I didn't realise it would be that low, and that was really, really telling, because I'm quite determined that one of the things we need to do is to make sure that the public library has a secure future for community-based learning long after people have stopped visiting it to borrow items, and I think we're on the way to doing that. So, but you can see a very wide range of needs there and reasons for visiting. You can measure success in other terms, and I just picked out these 3 slides, which I realised illustrate the fact that I only own one tie, but at least it would appear that I own more than one shirt. I don't know if you recognise all the people here, apart from the royalty. David Harewood was in Homeland. It's a Birmingham-based actor, and Jeff Lynne from the Electric Light Orchestra. These people chose to associate themselves with the library, to have their photo calls, in Jeff Lynne's case, his induction into the Birmingham's Walk of Fame. He chose the library for that venue. So that association, we're not running to them to do this. So that's a result. For me, that's more of a result, really, the library for children and young people. That looks like success to me. So in terms of this is work in progress, and I don't know what's going to happen next. You don't finish journeys of change, of course. The messages I think I've hopefully communicated, and I'm not going to repeat all the things that are there, but engaging staff, communication, we did a lot, and we certainly didn't do enough. You can always do more, keep doing more, but at the bottom there, never forget that the customer is what's important in this journey, and that's why we're all here. And then this is one of my favourite images. It's the sun. This was tweeted by a member of the public, but I've stolen it shamelessly to conclude my presentations. It's the sun setting the building in the foreground. The big concrete one is Birmingham's old central library. So symbolically, the sun is setting over the old central library, and change is happening. Thanks very much for listening.